Today's topic is the responsible clay, dig, buy, or make from waste. I'm Yulia Makluk, a self-taught potter and environmentalist from Ukraine. I'm an owner of Here and Now Pottery. And I will make an overview of the topic and talk a little bit about green procurement before handing it over to our distinguished guests, Sara and Anastasia. Just a quick intro so that you know who I am if you haven't already met, or if you're not following me on social media. As I said, I'm from Ukraine. I live in Irpin, which is near Kiev. I learned pottery by attending different workshops, and I'm producing tableware and vases. My focus is on the environmental sustainability of pottery production. I'm a graduated environmentalist, and I also consult creative enterprises in environmental management. Also, since the beginning of a full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, I was forced to try to use my creative skills for bringing war relief for people. So I've been using ceramics and social media to raise funds, or to find shelter for people who were fleeing the war. And for this work in pottery and sustainability and organizing, I was awarded the Risk Takers Fellowship for this year, which I'm really honored and thankful for. This webinar is part of the project Saving the World as a Potter. Excuse me. And it's a series of webinars and posts and the upcoming book about the sustainable practices in studio pottery. So it's for potters and ceramic artists and enthusiasts. So what is clay? You all probably know, but I will just highlight a few points. So clay is a natural material. It is abundant. It's can found almost in any country or place in the world. By nature, it is a sedimentary rock. It is an inert matter. It doesn't react chemically with other elements in the nature. It's been mined and refined to produce various ceramic bodies, which we buy and use as ceramicists. And until it's fired, it can be eternally recycled and made into new objects. Talking about sustainability and the environmental and social perspective of clay, there are several concerns to be taken into account, and I will name them. The first is the landscape destruction, because when clay is being mined industrially, this process creates a huge holes and destruction of the land. And also a vast amount of waste is being produced and dumped somewhere into the nature, which leads in turn to biodiversity loss. So plants and animals can no longer live there. There's like just a huge pit in the earth. Number two is scarcity. So although clay is abundant, some clays may become extinct or unavailable because of different reasons. For example, the famous is Yixing clay from China. It's very valuable. It's used for their teaware mostly, which is highly priced. And this clay it's like in a particular province in China, and it's been used for centuries and even thousands of years. And now there's almost no left, which means that like the Yixing pottery is very, very expensive. Another example is the Albany slip. It's a clay from the United States, very famous in pottery, used in many recipes. The mine is currently closed, so this clay is no longer available unless someone has like a pile of that preserved in their studio. And one of the recent examples are the Ukrainian clays from Donbas region, namely from the city of Slovyansk, where like a huge clay production and mining industry is being situated. So because of the war, it has become very dangerous and impossible to continue mining and producing this clay. And all of the Ukrainian ceramicists and many European ceramicists as well now don't have access to that, unfortunately, and we don't know whether it will be renewed and when. To us, this transport emits CO2 and other pollutants into the atmosphere. So like the longer the distance, the more CO2 is being emitted. And the last issue is, but not the least, of course, is the human rights violation. So like mining industry has been connected to violation of workers' rights and exploitation, indigenous people's rights violations and other crimes historically. And many of the materials that are being used in ceramics, not necessarily clay, but more like metals and other substances like talc, cobalt, copper, tin, gold, and lithium are like the minerals of concern, which are often connected with this kind of crimes against people. So how do we as potter and ceramic artists ensure that when we spend our money on materials, this money don't go to finance some crimes or environmental damage? There are few steps or few principles. I will name them and we will talk about them in greater detail. Number one is using the clay you have efficiently. So like collecting and reclaiming your studio waste, clay, glaze, pigments, ceramic shards. If you are interested to learn more about this particular topic, I suggest you check out my last webinar on zero waste pottery, where we went in greater detail about that. It is available on YouTube, and Ksenia will share the link to it in the chat. Next principle is buying from, if you are buying your material, buy it from trusted and better local companies. This is a principle called green procurement, and I will talk about them in more detail in a minute. Next principle is collecting your local wild clay and minerals. So like instead of buying, finding it in nature, and Anastasia will speak more because she has a vast experience in that. She will talk more about that. And the next principle is recycling waste material from other industries. So like instead of extracting new raw materials from nature, using the materials that are already available as waste. And this is the area of expertise of Sara, and she will share her thinking on that and her experience. Because there were questions in the registration, and I know this is a topic that is of interest to many potters, I just made this quick presentation about green procurement. So what is green procurement and what we as potters have to do with it? So green procurement is the process of selecting and purchasing products and services that have minimal negative impact on the environment. So it's basically like voting with your money on which companies you support, which practices you support as the consumer of these materials. And why is it important for us as potters? And how do we make sure that our money do not go to companies that don't respect the nature and its people? There are 4 essential steps. I will go through them one by one and show you some of the examples. Number 1 is choose the closest clay producer. So as we said, when the clay is being transported, or any goods, actually any materials, the transport emits CO2 and other pollutants into the air. And there is this estimate that heavy-duty transportation, so like freight trucks, ships, and planes emit around 13% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's a huge number. So if we don't want to be part of that, don't want to contribute too much to the climate crisis, it's better to stick to your national or regional clays. When we are buying clay from overseas and it's being transported by planes, like it becomes very costly to the environment. Step 2 is checking whether the producer is being accused of any eco or human rights violation. So like it can be as simple as Googling their name, like a company name, and like crimes or lawsuits. And I'll show you a few examples and to prove how important it can be. Here's just a map of large scandals and conflicts connected to mines all over the globe. And it's not clay, it's mostly gold, copper, zinc, and other minerals. We still use them in ceramics. And you can see that in almost every continent, there is something wrong going on with the mining industry, violating local people's rights, like displacing them or making their lands unsuitable for living. And if we there are several cases that are very important for us as ceramicists, namely cobalt and talc. So cobalt is a metal that is being used in the form of oxide in ceramics to produce these beautiful, rich blue colors that we probably all know about. And the problem with it is that most of this cobalt is being mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, where it's being connected, it's being proved that there is forced labor, so people are being forced to work there, and even children work there as hand pickers. What does it mean? It's like small children as young as 7 would, with their bare hands, would go to a mine and pick the pieces of the metal ore and then wash it to produce the cleaner material for the cobalt production. And of course, there's no safety, there's no protection for them. They're being very low paid or not paid at all. And the whole process is also very damaging for their health, because cobalt is a toxic metal. So when we are buying cobalt, we must be very, 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 must be very attentive in order not to buy this cobalt from DRC, which probably pays for the paramilitary troops who are controlling this whole. Another is talc. So talc is a mineral that's been used in ceramics, in ceramic bodies and glazes, mostly to lower their vitrification point. And there are two concerns related with talc. So number one, almost the majority of talcs that we are using in Europe and the United States come from Afghanistan originally, where it's been controlled by Taliban, this radical Islamic organization. And they are profiting from it. So the money goes to a terroristic organization. That's concern number one. And concern number two is that talc is often being contaminated with asbestos, and asbestos is a proven cancerogen, and it causes cancer. And there were many lawsuits against companies, for example, against Johnson & Johnson, who were using talc that's been contaminated, and it caused cancer in people. Meaning, again, if we are using talc in our production, or as the manufacturer of clay bodies is using it, there is probably connection to either to a terrorist organization, and also just the process of using it is also bad for our health. So these are just two of the examples while we should be very cautious with the procurement, with buying our materials. Step number 3 is in ensuring that we are buying the good materials, is studying the producer's sustainability policy. So sustainability policy is a public document that the company shares to prove that they are concerned with their environmental impact, and that they are taking measures to minimize it. So for example, there is this company Umicore, which actually it is a producer of cobalt, and it buys cobalt ore from the miners. And they have this zero tolerance policy towards forced labor, child labor, artisanal mining, breach of law and so on. So like they state that they do not buy cobalt that do these crimes. So at least this is what they declare. And if we know that our cobalt comes from this particular company, we can be like more assured that there is nothing wrong going, at least like not these worst cases are going in the supply chain of this mineral, of this metal. Another example is Sibelco. It's a European producer of ceramic bodies, and they have also a sustainability policy. One of the chapters of it is about closure of mines and biodiversity, and they have this goal by 2030 to restore active quarries and mines with added value for biodiversity and ecosystems, which basically means when they are done with the mine, they will try to recultivate it and to make sure that life can return to it. Well, probably it's not the worst thing to do, and if they're doing it or plan to do it, that's a good thing. And last example is this company Whitgert from Germany. They are producing this specific green body, which is a stoneware body made of 100% secondary raw materials. So like when they collect all the waste and scraps from the ceramic body production and make like a new body from it, which is, and also it's made in an energy efficient way, and they are recycling all of the water in the process. So like, and this green body is available for purchase, and like when you're using it, you are you can be assured that it's a little bit better than others environmentally wise. I'm not like endorsing this particular three companies, but this is just an example of something to look for when you are considering using materials from a particular company. And the last step in the green procurement is requesting and reading safety data sheet. So safety data sheet is a document which states all of the potential hazards and toxicity and handling prescriptions for a particular ceramic body, glaze, frit, pigment, whatever. And they are usually available from the producer's website. If not, it's possible to email the producer and ask for this document, and they are required to share them. So this is, for example, a standard clay company from the United States, and it's a safety data sheet for their particular 100 low fire white clay. And they state that it has like a hazard for people because of the respiratory silica, which is contained in any ceramic body, of course, but this is a warning about that. And also they say they have this environmental precaution that clay is a natural mineral product, and in general, in theory, it should not pollute the water bodies. So it's kind of safe, like placing this ceramic body into the environment. Of course, it's better to reclaim it, but if it ends up in nature, it's not toxic, right? And it's not the whole sheet, it's like a longer, the sheet itself, the document itself is much longer, and it has all of the information about potential hazards of a particular product. And it's a good thing to do before using any material, is to look through this safety data sheet. So to summarize, green procurement of ceramic materials consists of 4 steps. One is choosing the closer producer, not to transport your clay from too far. Check the producer if they are responsible for any eco or human rights violation, and then probably restrict from buying from them. Studying the producer's sustainability policy to see what good they are doing, and requesting and reading their safety data sheets to see if there is any potential hazard related to a particular material. That was my short intro on the topic of responsible clay usage and on the green procurement. If you found it interesting and you want to know more about that, you could go to Instagram and follow my page Here and Now Pottery, where I share all kinds of information like that. You could buy and download my PDF guide on sustainable ceramic studio practice called Greener Pottery. It is available on Etsy and on Amazon. And you can follow these hashtags on Instagram, Potters Save the World and Sustainable Ceramics Practice, which I use also to mark all the posts that are related to this topic. And now I am happy to introduce one of our guest speakers, Anastasia Tomaszewska. Anastasia is a potter and owner of a brand, Tomasz Pottery. And I have been known Anastasia for many years for her expertise and practice in wild clays and ash glazes. She's actually the person from whom I heard about the ash glazes for the first time. And Anastasia will talk about her practice and how and why do you collect wild clays. So Anastasia, the floor is yours. Please.
Hello, Yulia. Thank you for introducing me. First, I want to say that I'm not a speaker. I'm not like a person who can make good presentation. I'm just person who go in the wild in the tree forest and dig some clay and make fun from it. So I will share my screen. I'm Anastasia Tomaszewska. I'm the creative mind behind the brand Tomasz Pottery. I called it like this. I'm from Kiev, from Ukraine, and I have been doing ceramics for 9 years. It all started with me binge watching pottery videos online. That's where I learned everything I know about ceramics. Turns out most of the potters I follow dig their own clay and make their own glazes. So naturally, I wanted to be a pro and dove into researching clay and its natural wonders. Turns out clay isn't just for sculpting. You can also make glazes out of it. You can mix it, all sorts of cool stuff like sand, chalk, stone, glass, and even shells. But then I started to thinking about the cost and the environmental impact on mining clay. So in my work, I combine purchased clay with clay I dig up myself. This way I get the best of both worlds. I especially love using ash glazes and mixing them with clay, which I will not use in body like usual. Yes, this is, yes. Sorry. Especially now this approach works great when you don't need massive amounts of clay. Let's face it, you can't really on wild clay alone forever. The soil is always changing due to natural forces like landslides and rains. If I have clay that isn't fired as a complete product, I either mix it into my purchased clay and turn to the glaze. My ash glaze usually consists of clay and ash, but I'm always on lookout for different plant waste to give my glazes unique effects. About 4 years ago, I built this amazing anagama kiln in Ukraine. It's based on a book by legendary master Furutani Michio. My plan was to fill that kiln with lots of beautiful creations and fire it once a year, because it's really big. Sadly, for the past 2 years, I haven't been able to use it due to the war. However, I already preparing some pieces for firing once the war will over. Speaking of which, even since Russian invasion in my country, I've had to relocate to Romania. I came here when I was 8 months pregnant with my 5-year-old son. And it was a tough time, but with the support of many wonderful people, now I live in Cluj-Napoca. I even received financial support to start my own ceramic studio and teach aspiring ceramists. We're about to kick off the 5-day ceramic camp tomorrow, starting with a visit to a kaolin quarry to search for clay and to sculpt some awesome sculptures from it. Yes, so let's talk about, let's listen me about advantages of digging your own clay compared to buying it from a manufacturer. First, you get to directly interact with the material. It's a hands-on experience when you can observe how clay changes during processing and firing. Plus, digging your own clay gives you access to different types with unique characteristics and colors, allowing you to experiment and create one-of-kind pieces. Here is a bonus. It can be cost effective. When you dig clay yourself, you're investing your time and effort instead of your wallet. And let's not forget about preserving traditions and cultural aspects. By digging your own clay, especially from local sources, you deepen your connection with the land and contribute to preserving traditional methods and heritage. But before you grab your shovel, there are a few things to consider. Digging clay independently requires physical effort, knowledge of geology, ecology, and compliance with local regulations. Some areas may have restrictions or bans on local clay digging, especially in conservation areas. If you encounter restrictions, reach out to local authorities like your town hall, conservation department, or natural resource management organizations. Find out the rules and procedures for obtaining a permit to collect clay in natural places. Describe your intentions and explain why it's important to you to collect clay, and you will do it in an environmentally friendly way. And once you get the green light, make sure to follow all rules. So now I can tell you how to get your clay yourself. Here are some tips. First, you need to explore your local geology. Check out geological maps and information about your location. Look for areas with rich clay deposits like rivers, valleys, or watersheds. Explore the local nature. Keep an eye out for natural clay springs where clay surfaces naturally. It could be riverbanks, cliffs, swamps, or flooded areas. These places often have clay readily available without need to extensive digging. Look for signs of clay. Pay attention, yes. Pay attention to the ground, especially in wet areas. Clay can come in different colors like red, brown, gray, or white, or green. Look for clay fragments, deposits, or signs of softened soil. Check the clay's consistency. Take a small piece of soil, moisten it with water, and check its texture. If it becomes smooth, sticky, and form a ball or a coil, you might have found the clay. Extract the clay. Start digging small holes in the clay-rich area. Begin with the surface layer and work your own way down. Sorry, my child is crying. I hope you're not hearing it. So collect the clay from each layer. Store the clay in containers or plastic bags. Very important to minimize damage to nature. When mining clay, be mindful on the environment. Dig carefully to avoid destroying vegetation, damaging the tree roots, or contaminating water sources. After you're done, make sure to restore all mining site to its original state. Yes, here's my photos.
Sorry, Anastasia, I just wanted to ask you if it's okay, or do you maybe you
Yes,
need to take care of your son?
no, it's fine. My mom will care.
Okay.
Grandma
Thank
always. So here is an example what it look like when you find the clay and when you can dig it and to try it, and how you will process it when you will pick it to your studio. Yes, and also for those in community studios where experimenting with new white clays might be not so easy, I recommend started with small pieces. Grab about 100 grams of each type of clay you find. Create a cup-shaped sample, dilute it, and apply it with a brush on your main store-bought clay. So it's like on the picture. This way you can test the new clay without committing to large volumes. This is another one clay. So it's fired in the kiln like a body and like a cup and like a with brush. And you will check, is it better for glazing or to make a piece from it? Here is the example how it's look like when you put it before and after firing. So always make samples because oh, it's not working. I have a lot of samples, but for you, for first time, you don't need to make so many. Yes, because if you will not make the samples, you can have something like this. If you will not know about temperature of your clay. Yes, and this is all what I want to say. I hope it was interesting, and it was interesting, and I hope I help you with some questions. I don't know. Yes, Julia, what you will
Thank
say?
you so much, Anastasia. It's been amazing. I really, really enjoyed your presentation, even though I knew about your practice before, but it's such an enriching experience to witnessing your work. People, if you have any questions, comments, ideas, please add them in the chat. We have time to discuss them. While people are thinking about that, I have an intro question to you, Anastasia. Like, I know that you've tried how many, I don't know, several hundreds of different clays probably in Ukraine. Is there one that you particularly like your favorite place for clay?
My favorite place. When I try something, I pick it to my studio, make a test, and then I think about what is good and what is bad. Yes, you see in every places there are some good clay and not so good. It depends on the area which you live in, where you live in right now, because. Yes, I have some clay from Ternopil region, where is my kiln, but it's difficult to go there and pick the clay, and I use it only for the glazes. So yes, I have one. It's in Ternopil region. I answered.
Is it where your anagama is?
Yes, yes.
I see. Okay, so yeah. Priyanka writes, very informative. Thank you so much. Sara says, thank you. Really great to see how you work. I don't see much questions at the moment. Maybe we'll have them later.
If somebody asks some questions, I can ask them in social media, like Instagram, when you will add the video. And
yeah.
also ask,
okay, we do have questions actually. Wow. People just took their time to write them. So Hillary says, thank you, very interesting. Do you use Sagar to fire your test pieces, and do you incorporate ground rocks? So like, do you put your tests in a ceramic
A
box?
box, I understand. No, I
And
didn't put it. I fire it in my electric kiln up to 1,200 degrees.
so con 6 around.
250 degrees. So this is my temperature, my usual temperature, and it is fine. I fire. Yes, at first I also was concerned about this, and I'm afraid to fire my ash glazes, but it's fine. I'm just if I'm not sure about the clay, I just put it on the small plate. Like this plate is made from clay, which will not in any way melt. And I put there clay or samples and use it. But
Okay,
not
yeah,
the Sager, not the
not the
Sager.
sugar.
Ground
And
rocks, yes, I tried ground rocks. I crushed it, but it's very hard. You know about it, Julia. You asked this question in our
yeah,
Ukraine group, how to make it easily, and I also didn't find the answer. Maybe it will be like a machine what is crushing the rocks, because when you find the rock and you will like it how it's melt, so when you will crush the rock and your small cup will be very good, you will need to find more of these rocks, and you will think about how to make the many amount of glaze for it, and this is brainstorming.
yeah. One of the options that people suggest is to calcinate your rock first. So like heat it in your kiln to, for example,
Yes.
600 degrees, and then it crushes more easily, but still you have to grind it somehow.
Yes, still yes.
Yeah, thank you. And another question from Sara Howard, our next speaker. Do different clays need to be processed differently?
You just process it in separate pots, and that's all. But the work what you make, it is the same. So you, how it says, I read some. You just make it with a sieve. How it says, to grab it a sieve, to pour the clay through it and remove the rocks and these roots, and that's all. This is for the same clay.
So like you bring your clay to the studio, you add water, you sieve it.
I fill container with water, leave it for a night, then I sieve it, put away the water what I don't need, so it's the
It
clay
settles.
down, settles. Yes, I take off the water, and then I put this clay or outside on the sun if I have time, or I can put it to the plaster mold and it will dry, and I can use it for my tests and then to make the pieces.
Yeah. I once was to Anastasia's studio a few years ago, and it's like it's full of buckets of clay, and everything is like written, this sample is from here and that is from here. It's like a huge lab of clay production. Yeah. Really, really exciting.
So here in Romania, when I come here, we go with our club of moms just for a camp, small camp with a barbecue near the lake. And I saw that it was a quarry. It's not used now, but I saw this clay and I think, what, it is just lying here, I will go back again. So, and now we are making the camp there, and we will dig the clay, I hope. But on the weather says that all week will be raining.
So you already will have liquid clay. How convenient.
Like this, the glaze.
Great. Wishing you all the luck with the camp. And we have one more question from Hillary. 600 Celsius, always a safe temperature to fire rocks to. I'm just starting to experiment with incorporating found geological materials, but I'm concerned about damage to my kiln.
Do you think Yulia, do you think rock will blow out?
It might. So for rocks, I would make like some kind of a vessel from stoneware.
Yes,
Yeah,
I do.
and
I'm
put it
also
in there.
concerned about this. Maybe if it will be small rocks, like a small, a lot of small rocks, it will not blow out. But if it's just a big piece, I think it will blow out. And I think even if you storage it, this part will also blow out.
Yeah, and there are particular types of rock that would definitely blow. I don't know their names in English right now, like I can't recall. But Hillary, I guess like it is available somewhere on Google. So like just maybe try to find the minerals, like their names and how they look, and check your rocks before calcinating them if they are potentially exploding. Yeah, that would be a suggestion. All right. Any more questions to Anastasia?
About the rocks, I also have a lot of questions. I just want to say something what I know, but I'm also concerned about this, and I'm keep researching how to use the rocks. But the rock is not mine a theme number one. I most of all researching ash from various of plants and use them in my wild clays. Yes.
Yeah.
So this.
Yeah.
We can go to Sarah.
Any last questions? Just waiting for a few more seconds. Maybe people are holding it to themselves because it's a rare opportunity to talk to a person who is knowledgeable about wild clays. Or otherwise, as Anastasia suggested, you can reach her by, for example, Instagram, and if she has time, she can answer you there. I don't see many more questions. So thank you so much, Anastasia, for coming and for making time for us in your busy professional and family life. Thank you for your presentation and for answers. Are you staying with us till the end of the webinar?
Yes, I will listen to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. On this, let me introduce our next speaker. So Sara Howard is an award-winning ceramicist and a ceramic designer and a material researcher from the UK and Indonesia. She is also an author of this book called The Circular Ceramics. It's very recent and new and fresh. I just got mine 2 or 3 days ago, and it's just amazing. If you are interested in recycling industrial waste into your pottery materials, I suggest you go and buy one after this webinar because it's a really good one. And Sara will speak to us about how to eliminate or minimize using raw materials and instead substitute them with industrial waste. Sara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yulia, and thank you for organizing today's event and bringing us like-minded people together. So, my name is Sara, and I studied ceramic design at university in Central St. Martin's, and I graduated in 2020 with a ceramic collection made from 100% industrial waste. So I called it circular ceramics, which I define as an industrial symbiosis around the ceramics industry, whereby the waste materials from external industries replace the virgin materials within ceramic production. And since then, I've been working to scale up the use of industrial waste with ceramic producers. I'm currently in Indonesia working with a factory here, and we've got a collection coming out this summer, which is made from industrial waste sourced from local businesses, consumer waste, and also from the factory itself. And I also work with ceramics and coral conservation programs, and another project working with a property developer and excavation waste, which is relevant to this talk. So I'll bring that up later. And in terms of my interest in sustainability or ethical practice, I've always been interested in how the impact humans have on the environment, more so the negative side. And studying design, I felt that as a designer and a maker, we could have a huge influence in the world we live in. It's Ellen MacArthur who says 80% of a product's environmental impact is decided at the design stage. So I feel everyone here in this talk is probably in a very powerful position to change the world that we live in. And I had very little experience of ceramics before I started my degree. I did a 1-month project, and that was enough to get me hooked. But I went into my degree not really understanding the materials that I worked with. I had a workshop and it just had an abundance of clay. Anytime it ran out, it just magically reappeared. And the same with glaze ingredients. There was every ingredient you could possibly want. I had no idea where they were coming from, the journeys that they went on before they got there. But all I knew is as soon as it ran out, it was just back to the top again. And it was the same when I was working with ceramic mass producers. I saw the abundance of materials they were consuming and consequently the volume of waste and how that was being treated and dealt with by external companies. And I was mapping everything out and trying to get a better understanding of the impact we were having. And from that, I felt that as a ceramicist, we could be much more ambitious in what we deem as waste and our applications of waste. And so I guess I made it my mission to sort of try and close the loop within production and on all scales. So from studio potter to mass manufacture. So there is a well-known quote in the mining industry that says, if we can't grow it, we have to mine it. And sadly, this is true for ceramics. So we can't grow ceramic clay, and we also can't grow the materials that we need to produce it. So when people refer to ceramics as a sustainable practice, it always makes me feel slightly uncomfortable because to me, and from my viewpoint, we can't sustain the way that we produce because it's a finite resources and it's not regenerative. And one ceramic producer I worked with, they had a clay body made from 8 different minerals, mined from 5 different locations around the world. So to extract those minerals, process it and transport them to where the factory was, it's hard to say that the clay body is sustainable because we're not using locally produced materials. They're coming from every corner of the planet. And this is an aerial view of the southwest of England, in Cornwall, where St Austell is based. And St Austell is well known for the rich deposits of kaolin clay, which have been extracted for 250 years. The main method of mining that they use is open pit mining. And you can see the white deposits in the center of the screen. And this involves blasting high pressure water in large volumes to dislodge the rock. And this produces a large volume of wastewater. And these are stored in the puddles that you can see on the screen here. And so it requires a large surface area, as you can see, and then you get a lot of the wastewater, which unfortunately, even though there's regulations and health and safety practices in place, people have lost their lives drowning in the slurry because it acts as a quicksand. And this is a country where, this is in the UK, where we have really strict regulations and money is put into place to avoid things like that happening. But yeah, it still occurs. And this is a closer view of the ponds and also where the kaolin is extracted. And for every ton of china clay that is extracted, roughly 9 tons of waste is produced. So these waste is referred to as tailings, and these include rocks and mica, and it might include other minerals as well. But it gives you a sense of the scale of extraction in order to extract just a small deposit. It's worse for other materials like copper. For copper, when they extract a mineral ore, it actually only contains 0.5% of copper, and that's a high grade ore. So when they extract lower grade ores, the volume of waste is much, much higher. And it's a bit ironic because these minerals that are being mined are critical to our clean energy future. It's what we need for our batteries. It's what enables us to speak to each other and communicate. So it's a bit ironic, but I'm not saying mining is a bad thing. It's critical to the lives that we live and our future, but we need to be a bit more conscious and perhaps source other materials if they are available. But on a brighter side, the company Imris, who manage mines, they also invest a lot of money in restoring the land. So they have projects where they planted heathlands, and it covers 2,000 acres and 26 square miles across Cornwall, allowing the previous habitat to start to regrow. I think it's fair to say those minerals will never be back in the quantities that we've extracted them, but we can restore the wildlife and surroundings to somewhat a carbon capture area. Unfortunately, it's not like that everywhere in the world. We're very privileged in the UK to have strict laws, but in countries like India, where this kaolin processing site is, the production of dust from the processing causes a number of health-related chest disorders across the people who live locally and also the workers. And people who reside in the local area also suffer with contaminated water, which they tend to use for their farmland, but they can't anymore. And they're also at risk of landslides. So people are forced to sell their land and move elsewhere because the companies that run these sites aren't taking responsibility for the community and then also the planet. And then we also have the issue which Julia brought up about scarcity of minerals. So that's something that I'm very concerned with and interested. I take a lot of time to look into it, but it's really hard to find concrete evidence and concrete numbers about how long we have left to extract certain minerals. I was speaking to a quarrying company in the UK, and they said that in St Austell, they have 5 years left of extracting good quality kaolin. If they were to continue extracting 5 years later, the quality of clay would drastically decrease. And I think if you compare, I was talking to someone the other day, if you compare Royal Dalton plate from 100 years ago to one that's recently made, you'll see a drastic difference in the whiteness of it. It's a much more grayer now. And yeah, you've got the quality decreasing, and then also we have the issue of costs. So we're going to be competing with other industries. Ceramics is a very small industry compared to others, but if we're competing with clean green technology, then the price of these minerals as they deplete will only increase. And so that's something to bear in mind. I worry that some materials might not be economical to use in ceramic production in the future. And perhaps just because we don't want to charge £50 for a mug, that we have to eliminate it from our production or resort to alternatives. And with all that in mind, when I tried to work in making the ceramic production more sustainable, I did first look at creating a completely closed loop cycle within ceramic production. Unfortunately, after the chemical changes that occur at every different stage of production, we can't just get a plate, break it back into its clays, feldspars, aluminas, flux, and start again. So I then came across an industrial symbiosis whereby we worked with other industries' waste streams to replace those virgin raw materials. And that way we eliminated the use of mined materials and quarried materials. And that seemed to work. We could produce ceramics made from 100% waste and not deplete our resources any further. And the way I approached this model was to explore the other industries that were consuming the same virgin raw materials. So I went to stone manufacturers, glass manufacturers, and the construction industry, and I mapped out all the waste streams and looked at what was going to landfill. So it was really important that I only worked with materials that were going to landfill and weren't being repurposed in another way. Sometimes it's tempting that if something's waste, it means it's okay to use. But I think that we have to be selective and make sure that this material is benefiting by being used in the ceramic industry. An example is the glass offcuts. Glass can be infinitely recycled without losing purity. And so it makes sense to leave those offcuts in glass production rather than give it an end of life in ceramic production. And these are the materials that I worked with. You've got the clay on the left, the stone in the middle, and the glass waste on the right. The stone and the glass is collected as a slurry, so it's already ground down into a fine powder. So it eliminates all the crushing and grinding, which is often on a small scale a really laborious task and expensive equipment as well. So it was really important that the waste streams were coming in a functional medium. And this is the company that I'm collaborating with in Indonesia. They're called Kavala, and everything is handmade. And we've got around 150 artisans who work here. And doing this, replicating the same model from London to Bali, which is where I am, was just a mind-bending challenge. And I knew it wasn't going to be simple, but I really learned the hard way. It's not a copy and paste model. And it's mainly due to people having different attitudes towards waste, different governments, regulations. People here aren't familiar with recycling. And so just introducing separating waste was a challenge in itself. And the government regulations mean that everything is a commodity. So in the UK, companies would have to pay to dispose of their waste. But here, people dump it illegally or sell it on. So this is the first time that I've had to purchase a waste material for production, but actually the price is 25 times cheaper than the material it replaces. So it's still economical to do. But yeah, it was a lot of learning on the way, but proud to have a collection come out and have a bespoke industrial symbiosis specifically for this factory. And then, as Leah said, I've also got my book, and the new one just came out 2 months ago. And this is aimed at studio potters so that they can also apply the same processes to their production. And so I always knew when I first made my collection that there was no benefit, or very small benefit, in me producing my own collection. And if I really wanted to make an impact, it was about sharing the solutions, working with bigger manufacturers. And so this book became a tool in achieving that. So all my methods are in there. It's open source and released under the Creative Commons license. All it requires is attribution. But yeah, I'm not a writer and I'm not a graphic designer, but it's really just a vessel to communicate what I'm learning on the way. And another project is Golden S Studio. So this started the start of 2022. And I collaborated with a property developer based in London, mainly in Wimbledon. And not all the excavation waste, a very small proportion of the excavation waste from the properties we processed on site with a team, which you can see here. So they were doing what Anastasia was doing, soaking it in water, sieving it, blending it up as well, and then we were dehydrating it. And then we distributed the clay to anyone who wanted it. So it was mostly to ceramicists, we had artists, we had people who work with natural dyes, communities and school, and they all came to the site to collect what we had. And it's been about a year and a little bit on, and we've now got final products, final artworks made from the clay. We've got Jacobs on the left and the right, and then in the middle, Eleanor, who's a painter, has used it on the canvas. And these are going back into the home where that clay was excavated. So it's gone full circle, very nearly. Around August, the house will be completed. But it's mainly to start a conversation about the waste, which would have otherwise been sent up north to be part of a golf course, I think, and some to go to waste. But when we are ceramicists in London and clay isn't really readily available to dig, working with the construction company is an option. But from my own experience, when I started my collection, they're one of the hardest industries to work with. There's so many health and safety rules and regulations, which make it really hard to access the sites. So collaborating with Gabriel, we can infiltrate from the inside and make it accessible. And yeah, that's the idea, is just to start that conversation and yeah, get the construction industry on side with us. Because yeah, there's an abundance of clay and it makes sense to use it rather than import clays from all corners of the world. And then I also did a few tips from my perspective. And My first one is source to studio transparency. So if you're not sure where your materials are coming from, how they're being processed, then perhaps it's wise to look for an alternative solution. So it's being open to identifying and sourcing your materials locally. And then you have complete transparency of the whole process. If you eliminate the unknowns, then it's likely you can eliminate the chance that you're consuming materials that are unethically mined and extracted, along with the ecological impact that that has. Another thing is check who owns the mineral rights. So coming from London, where pretty much every piece of land is owned by someone, it's really important that you are respectful of the different properties, the different land, and ask permission always. You don't want to find yourself in a difficult position. I think even if it's public land, it might be worth just checking online that what you want to do is okay, especially if you're taking large quantities. I'm sure small quantities is okay. And in terms of accessing construction sites, it's very tricky, but what I recommend is getting in touch with smaller sites of operation. So if you see people digging up the road, if you see your neighbor excavating something, maybe they're building like a vegetable patch. London's built on clay, and so are a lot of places. So they're much easier to access than a large organization. And the third thing is accommodating aesthetics. So I mentioned before about Royal Dalton's bone china body being much grayer now, but to me that is not really an issue. Like moving away from seeing speckles as an issue, this is more of a problem that we have on an industrial scale, with being really picky about the finish and imperfections. And perhaps it's time to embrace it now so that we can extract kaolin for more years, instead of just depleting now. And the fourth is quality control. So I recommend being really strict and disciplined with yourself with every stage of production. So from greenware to this, being really selective about what you're putting in there and making permanent in the world. And the same with glaze. And that was something that I learned working with factories. I think when I was a studio potter, I thought everything I made was beautiful and deserved to go in the kiln. But seeing it on an industrial scale and how strict they are, it's made me much more disciplined in my own practice. And that's it for me. Thanks, Julia.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sarah. Splendid presentation and very thought-provoking. And you just touched upon many topics here: resource scarcity, waste recycling, construction sites. A lot to process, and I'm sure people will have questions. So, dear guests, there is a chat box. Please write down whatever you want to ask Sarah about. And while people are writing, I just had like comment/question about the resource extraction. We have been speaking about mining and extraction for the whole webinar, and how like huge it is, and what are the impacts on the environment and the people, but also like I think it's worth keeping in mind that we as studio potters probably have like a tiny portion out of this whole material flow, right? Because it mostly goes to where, like construction, chemical industry, what else, paper, something else. So you, as someone who researched this topic, can you give us some estimate or just your view on this? Thank you.
So actually the ceramic industry consumes a very small percentage of materials compared to all the other industries combined. I think where the motivation to move to other materials that aren't commercial is going to be through cost, because the competitiveness for these materials, like the extraction needs to double by 2060 in order to meet our needs. And right now, I'm not sure if actually the mining industry has the technology to meet those demands, and therefore the cost is only going to increase. So that would be one motivation to get ahead of the game now and start exploring and being comfortable with using other materials. But also I do believe it's always this, people's small actions will build up, and make an impact. I know that we are really small in terms of the world, but it's the same with moving away from meat, for example. Like, that group of people is now expanding. And yeah, and I think it's also just like guilt. I live off guilt. I have guilt if I know I'm contributing to something. So yeah, it's really up to you. And I'm not saying that you have to use 100% waste materials. Even if you're able to eliminate one material from your order purchase list, from your ceramic supplier, then I think that's a huge step. But at the base level, I think it's about being conscious and treating the materials that we have like the rarity that they really are. And yeah, being really conscious with our whole production and how much we're ordering and consuming.
Yeah, thank you so much. Cost effectiveness is, of course, yeah, it is something that like you can calculate probably, and that motivates you beyond just our like ethical concerns. We have comments from the audience. Sara writes, "Thank you, so fascinating and inspiring." And Lulu says, "So interesting. Thank you so much." Probably people take time to write more comments. And I just have next question from myself, because I'm a host and I can ask you whatever I want. So like, I'm really excited by your practice of industrial waste recycling and repurposing and this whole symbiosis concept. So what if I'm a studio potter and I'm interested in starting using some industrial waste to substitute some of the materials I buy? Like, how do I start and where do I go to?
So I would first look at the local industries that surround you. It really depends on everyone's location. So for example, I was working with a glass manufacturer in London, and I was working, the manufacturer create glass panels for buildings, and they have a edge polisher which produces a slurry when it polishes the edge. And that was the material that I was using to replace the frits in my glazes. And when I came to Bali, that machine just simply did not exist. We didn't have industrial equipment. We are a small island in the world. So I was a bit stumped at first, but then it became about learning the local waste ecologies. And we don't have a recycling plant for consumer waste glass. So all the waste was either going into the rivers, it was being burnt, it was being going to landfill or being exported to Java. But actually it was the time at which petrol prices started to increase and they couldn't export it anymore because they weren't making any money. And so the consumer glass collected from the rivers in Bali, which have been they've just been disposed of, that's the glass source that we now use. So I would never use consumer glass in London because we have the infrastructure to recycle it. But here it makes sense too, because it was just building up and there wasn't a secondary use at the time for it. And I see Keely's message. I'll say hi to Keely. So Keely worked at Wedgwood, which was the first manufacturer that I worked with. And that was the first time I was exposed to that scale of production. And actually, I think that experience instigated my third year project and is where I am today. And Wendy is in the other room. So I'll tell her you say hi, Keely.
Thank you, Keely. Nice to have you. Yeah, I think it's super valuable, Sara, that you have this very different types of experience with the industry, starting with big ceramic producers and this glass company and then smaller studios, and also like in very different national contexts that you just said in the UK and in Indonesia. So yeah, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. It's probably been like a lot of work to put this whole knowledge together. Oh, and we have a question from Hillary. A really interesting talk. Thank you. I'm local to King's X, and I have been King's Cross in London, right? And I have been experimenting with London clay from my tiny garden, but I'd love to have access to extracted clay from the King's Cross site. How can I approach them? Very practical question.
Well, yeah, I actually know the construction company. It's Argent Construction. And when I talked about the headache of trying to get hold of people, yeah, I'm referring to the King's Cross construction site. So, sorry, Hillary, to break the bad news to you. But yeah, I can see if I can dig up a contact for you to get in touch with. But it is a hassle in terms of continually resourcing clay from them. I don't know if you've tried to reach out.
No, but I've been, because my garden is tiny, and I've been pondering this for quite some time and thinking, how can I source stuff locally? But I was thinking, Hampstead Heath, I can't go with a bucket and, you know, you just, in London, you can't just go and start digging somewhere. And I want to be able to be transparent and honest about where I've got it from, because also that's part of the narrative. And King's Cross couldn't be nearer. And, you know, I just thought that would just make so much sense, because the other thing, I have a bad back in the digging. So like if it's already extracted, it kind of feels like a win-win. But I loved your suggestion also of road diggers. There's always a road dug up somewhere. And the other thing is we have, there's a prison locally that used to be a quite famous prison for women, and that was closed down several years ago, and the building's being flattened, and they're going to reconstruct housing there, and that's a stone's throw from me. It's very close by. So you really made me think about, you know, this could be a solution to my problem, and that's another place I could approach. But I've no idea how, you know, how to start that process. And you know, obviously I could just start by introducing myself and saying what I want, but I guess if you've got any tips, that might be useful. I've ordered your book, so perhaps they're all in there. Thank you anyway. I found it very inspiring talk. Thank you.
I'm glad. But I have some tips. Well, in terms of getting hold of construction waste, often it starts with an email, but it's going to the wrong person because the corporation is so large. So when I see clay being excavated for, like on the road site, which is often a bit more sandier, but it's still usable, or any other site, I often just go with a bucket and a spade, and they can't really say no to you. And often you're doing them a favor anyway, because they're having to transport it elsewhere. So yeah, often we know how emails just slip through the net and people don't respond. So I always, at my last resort, just rock up with a bucket and spade. But I will put you in touch. I'll find out who is running Argent Construction. I think it's the civil engineer that I was working with. And also you're really close to Rochester Square.
Yes,
in Camden.
I am, yes. Yeah.
They just did a project. I think Phil Root ran the project, and they excavated the clay from site and fired it and built a kiln. And maybe that's something you want to explore.
Do you know, I did know that and I'd forgotten, so thank you. That's a great reminder. Thank you. That's been so helpful.
Wow, it's amazing how you ladies found these local connections. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing your experience with that, and nice to have you, Hilary. Thanks for being an active audience member. I hope you can get grab on of that clay. Also, just wanted to say, you probably know there is this book about wild clays that was just last year called the Wild Clays Creating. Oh, sorry, my Zoom covers it. The whole title, but it's by Matt Levy, Takuro Shibata, and Hitomi Shibata, and it's available on the Amazon. And it's about wild clay with many details, and probably they also address the actually entering the site. I haven't read it yet. I just ordered it and waiting for it. Anyways, just checking if we still have like a couple more minutes for this webinar. If people have any last minute questions or comments, there is time for them. Other than that, I'll just make a very quick summary of our today's meeting. So this webinar was called Responsible Clay, Dig, Buy, or Make from Waste. It's part of the Saving the World as a Potter project, supported by the I'm tired already. Supported by the Risk Takers Fellowship and people on my Patreon. So thank you so much if you are among my patrons. So we talk about how clay and other ceramic materials that we use as potters and ceramic artists come from nature, basically, and their extraction have some influence upon ecosystems and people, and how we can use some of the precautions to ensure that we are not contributing to the environmental degradation and to people's right violation. So we spoke about how to use wild clays and how to find and process it. We spoke about how to buy ceramic materials and to check whether the producers are ethical and legal in their operations. And we spoke about how you can use industrial wastes in order to substitute some of the raw materials that come from nature. And I hope it was informative. It was informative for me. Sara and Anastasia, thank you so much. I've learned, even though I knew about your practices, but I learned so much more from this presentation. So thank you for being generous and for allowing us to be part of your journey. What else I need to say? There are some words I need to say at the end. Yeah, thank you, dear guests and audience, for being with us and being active and supportive. If you have registered to this webinar, I will send you the link to the recording. Otherwise, the recording will be available on YouTube, and I put the link on my Instagram, Here and Now Pottery. Find me, and there will be a link in the bio, probably. I hope that you enjoyed it. To empower potters on their ways towards sustainability and to build a community where we share knowledge and support each other. If you want to get notified about the next meetings like that, there will be a webinar about managing a pottery studio and also about function and message of the ceramics that we produce and how it can be used also to bring about positive and progressive change into the society. So if you don't want to miss that, follow me on Instagram or on Facebook. Yeah, these are the two main platforms. And if you feel that this project is valuable for you and for the ceramic community, you may consider supporting me and Here Now Pottery on Patreon. You will get some exclusive content and occasional discounts and gifts, but mostly is just for supporting the work that is being done.